Hello and welcome to AngularAir. My name is Jeff Welpley. I'm your host. For this week's episode, we have a very special pre-recording that we made with Misko Hevery, the godfather of Angular, Rob Wormald and Jules Kremer, two members of the developer advocate team from the Angular core team. The beginning of this video got a little bit messed up, so that's why I'm recording this part again. We're going to jump right into Rob and Misko telling us how they're doing and what they've been up to for the past 2 years. Enjoy.
It's wonderful over here. I think we're going to release. What do you think, Rob?
I think it's time. I think it's about time.
Yeah.
Are you guys saying Angular 2 is ready?
Yes. It's ready, yes.
It's ready. It's baked. It's done. It's 2.0.0.
Oh, man. It's been so long.
How long has it been?
I can't count that long. I think it's been 2 years, I think.
It was before the job that I had before this job.
And aim for the official 2.0 release.
Yeah, we do.
I cannot pronounce it.
we wrote it down because it's very hard to pronounce.
Pre-oception.
We're going to bring our pro. We'll bring our boss here.
And the official release name is Proprioception Reinforcement, which kind of makes you like Spider-Man if you think in like super heroic, framework tendencies.
Proprioception
Reinforcement.
I think they missed it.
Spider-Man has awesome proprioception reinforcement.
Wait, who's reinforcing his proprioception?
I don't know who gave Spider-Man his powers.
Like, this is
Spiders.
proprioception means that you're awesome at like knowing where you are, and so therefore reinforcing the thing that you're already awesome on. That's like a double positive.
Double positive.
What's wrong with having a double positive?
Better than a double negative.
I don't know.
So wait, is that where the red and blue colors come from? Spider-Man?
Proprioception reinforcement? Yes.
Oh, that makes sense now.
Obviously, clearly.
What is the most proud feature or thing of Angular 2 that you guys have been developing or developed? Like in the time span of 2 years, what's the thing that makes you proud? It's yeah, we got that in.
The most amazing thing is the fact that we're releasing it.
Ooh, the whole thing. That's a really that's a good one. So I'm so proud of the one feature, the feature that makes everything, the whole thing.
Yeah, proud of everything. It's all amazing.
But let's see. So there's a lot of different things that are amazing in there. We think the ahead of time compilation is pretty cool.
Yep.
The fact that we can statically analyze everything, and we have some amazing tools lined up to be able to look at our templates and give you awesome completions and just everything you really expect from a top-notch development environment is possible now in Angular. The change detection speed up are pretty impressive. The fact that we can actually mix and have both dirty checking and the reactive style change detection. So if you're a hipster, you can definitely go that route as well. All of those things are covered.
So I'm going to be a hipster. I'm going to say I'm most proud of the observable stuff. I think that this whole reactive programming thing, I think is going to be really big. I think it's pretty cool that Angular is one of the teams pushing that forward. So that makes me a hipster, I suppose. But
you are a hipster, man.
That's okay.
Nice. So
just like
cool. So is Angular 2 a hipster framework, or is it a framework for enterprise?
It's both. I think that's the cool part about it is that whatever you choose, Angular was designed in your mindset in mind.
Angular can be anything you want it to be.
Okay, interesting. So what's the timeline look for Angular 2 after release? It's out. What happens now? We don't know anymore. It's just you got to fill us in.
There is lots of things in store for after final. We're just gonna make lots of stuff better, like animation. We have lots of stuff lined up for interactive animations, etc. We have things lined up for having even smaller binaries and faster startup times. So sky's the limit as to what can come next.
So some of the platform stuff, so Universal and web workers and all the sort of beyond the browser stuff, I think we go back and have a much closer look at that as we move forward as well.
Cool. So you released the Angular 2 framework, which is great for enterprise and hipsters. and in the future you're gonna like expand out, and it's gonna be a super heroic framework. Sweet.
So for example, web workers right now are still then labeled as experimental, but the core of the framework is set. So we'll bring the web workers into Spotlight and just expand in those directions.
Cool.
What was your focus for the last release? Did you work on something specific that you wanted to do before the release?
So I think RC6, the main thing was like take out all of the sort of legacy stuff that had been laying around, right, over the past 2 years of development. So just make sure that we have a clean, stable API. And then also making sure that like the AOT code gen was nice and easy to use, and I18N was the other big thing that came in at the end there. So those two, I18N and AOT, and making them work reliably, for sure, I think were the biggest focuses.
I think people just underestimate the amount of cleanup work is required to ship something.
It's like we haven't
What was it?
for 2 years, and then you gotta tidy your room after
I don't
2
know
years.
about your bedroom. Speak for yourself, but yes, it's a lot of work.
What was the thing that didn't make it in that you wish would have made it in?
I can, like, the one that I really want is the reactive observable view stuff. And I think that there's a lot of those little things that like we think it's a good idea, right? But I think that one of the things we want to see is what patterns people start to use when we go 2.0, right? So there's a couple of things with observables that I really want to put in, but I'm not sure how to do them yet. I'm not sure how people would use them yet. So I think there's just some things we want to watch people for the next kind of couple version dots and see where we go and see what patterns emerge, and then start thinking about the new stuff. Anything you really missed?
No, I think we were just focusing on the core because we wanted to make sure that the core of it is something that we can call done, final, and we won't have to change in the near future. So I'm really proud of the way the core turned out. So lots of stuff is now going to be able to be built on top of the core of it.
I think that's the most exciting thing is now that we've got a sort of a final 2.0 API, people can start building their own abstractions, their own frameworks, their own view managers, their own routers, all this stuff that was in NG1 that people, were building on top of the Angular 1 foundations. That's what I'm most excited to see about Angular 2. This new stuff starts to come out.
So are you guys starting to use release with Semver? Or?
We like to talk about this? Yeah, we can talk about this.
Yeah, I think it was decided that we will be heading Semver direction. So yeah, expect Angular 49 pretty soon.
Sweet. So Angular 3 will be released like 3 months from now.
Angular
Awesome.
3 will be a thing for sure.
Wait, there's a pain bear? What?
What's up, guys?
You don't know any prize for you, did you?
It's a framework for panda bears as well. So enterprise and panda bears.
We all know how much Enterprise loves pandas.
So now that Angular 2 is released, can you talk more about the CLI and that development and like ways to get involved with Angular, how to jump in really fast? Like, can you talk more about that?
So CLI, I think, as everybody knows, recently moved to Webpack, which I think was a big deal just because there's a whole community of stuff, right? So I think that the CLI will continue to grow on Webpack, right? I'm, at the moment, actually writing our AOT plugin for Webpack to make all that kind of work. So it's all nice and seamless. And I expect, again, like it's that kind of thing where we have a pretty good idea of what the basics people need are, right? They need a build tool, they need a CSS tool, whatever. But again, we don't really know yet where people will go with the CLI, right? So one of the things we're being careful to do is design in extensibility into that. And we'll have a sort of a plugin add-in ecosystem that we'll build up for that. But in general, right, like I think that we've got the basic necessities in the CLI, and we'll see what people start asking for, what they start wanting and needing out of their projects, right? Things like lazy loading and stuff that we want to get into is letting the CLI do things like pre-caching when you're routing, right? So if you're routing, you can go ahead and optimistically load pages so they're even faster for lazy loading. And all that kind of stuff, right? We want to see where the patterns emerge, what kind of apps people start building, where they start to see things that could be better, and we'll start baking that stuff and feeding it back into the CLI.
So if I'm ready to start building my app right now using the release, Would you recommend I go with the CLI as my build scenario and start from there, or what should I do?
I think it's a good question, and I think that for a lot of developers, especially those who are new to bundling and modules and this entire sort of ES ecosystem, then I think the CLI is a perfect tool, right? Because you just download it, you run a command, and you get an app ready to go. That's not to say, though, if you're an expert or you prefer Gulp or Webpack or System.js or whatever the next hipster build tool is, right? That's a totally legit way of doing things as well, right? So we want to give people the option of, we have an easy out-of-the-box solution, and I think for a lot of people that's great. But we also want to be clear that there's nothing about Angular that requires the CLI, right? So if you're more advanced, there's stuff you want to do, you want to have crazy, wacky build systems, then that's something you can totally do as well.
Should I, as someone that's using Webpack, is there some advantages to migrating to the CLI that I might get that I can't get from, just using basic Webpack now?
I think the big one is less the build tool. So in the CLI, we use Webpack primarily just for build, right? But the CLI is not just build. It does things like test scaffolding and running your tests and code generation and stuff like that. And those are useful things, right? So that's, I guess, the level above Webpack. As well, though, so I'm writing, as I said, like the ahead of time compilation plugin. That's not going to be specific to the CLI. That's just a Webpack plugin. So it should work in any Webpack environment you want to put it into.
Very cool.
So what size is the team working on Angular 2 and compared to Angular 1?
What do we have now? Around 15 to 20 people that are full-time.
We have like 4 rows, so yeah.
So we have about 20 core engineers that are Google employees, and then of course we've got numerous external contributors that are contributing to everything from Universal to the CLI, all that stuff.
There's about 20 on core, split across 4 teams. What? Mobile, material, core, and TypeScript.
Yep.
So a lot more than.
How many did Angular 1 have?
Less.
Way less. Probably like 5.
Really?
Yeah, it was smaller, way smaller. I mean, you got to keep in mind, right, that Angular 1 really was a framework part. Angular 2 is more of a platform, right? Angular 1 really just did the framework part, and we let the community do everything else. With Angular 2, we are trying to bite off a lot bigger pie, including widgets, material, components, rendering into multiple platforms, and so on. Plus, ahead of time compilation is a little bit more complicated. It requires a little more code than just in time.
So are you using Angular 2 in production apps at Google?
Yes, we are. So the biggest one is obviously the AdWords, which we've spoken to in the past. Jules, you might have some more?
Yeah, there's actually, I don't know that I'm allowed to tell you exactly which products outside of AdWords are using Angular 2, but we do have a couple of other internal customers using Angular 2. So I shouldn't say that because I'm not sure that I'm allowed to.
I know Brad mentioned many times that the Green Tea.
Green Tea is our internal CRM system. So like the Salesforce that's made specifically for Google is also on Angular 2.
And Google Fiber is also on Angular 2 as well.
And that's a public website, so we can see you knew them all. You didn't need me.
I just thought you would know more than I would.
You can just do our jobs instead. Fine.
And then we also have a list of enterprise customers that we're aware of that are already moving to Angular 2. But again, we didn't ask permission to talk about them other than the ones that you guys saw at ngConf, like Capital One, and NPR has a mobile app that's built on Angular 2, and the Weather Channel is using Angular 2. We've also heard from Tesla that their new website's in Angular 2, and a number of other really big companies that have already embraced it.
And there's definitely a couple of big properties inside of Google that we can't talk about yet, that at some point we'll be able to, but you'll have heard of them. So.
Yeah, Lucid, somebody's pointing out.
Oh, yeah,
was also at ngConf. That's true.
Yes, Lucid Trust was also at ngConf, and they have a great story that you'll actually hear a little bit more about what they've learned through using Angular 2 at Angular Connect. So they will again be in the keynote to talk a little bit about what they've seen from a performance perspective and give some actual numbers out there.
Do we see Angular 2 more for enterprise than startups? Was that the question you asked?
No.
And the answer is no.
That was the question.
Yeah.
I mean, I think if, at least in terms of what Rob and I do externally to Google and being developer advocates, when I set our priorities as a team, it is equally split between what between what I call the hipster startups and the large enterprises, right? And they have two unique sets of problems that we need to address, and I think Angular 2 fits for both of them. We are aware of a number of startups. I'm trying to be a little sensitive to that, just naming a bunch of customers without asking their permission to name them. But we are aware of a few out there already using Angular 2.
I think the thing is, it's one of those, the thing about Angular 2, I think, is that we retained a lot of the really nice sort of, declarative stuff that's in Angular 1, right? A lot of the stuff that people like in Angular 1, but in Angular 2, we've taken care that like the stuff that you like is scalable, and I think that that's the big thing, right? It's the stuff that was not sort of previously scalable in 2 or in 1, so that's like compiling everything dynamically, right? Like doesn't scale in a huge application. We can do that at AOT, so that does scale, right? So you can start as your hipster sort of startup, and then when you get your massive, Series C seed funding and you go public, then you can keep using it and everything works.
And here's something else you guys might find interesting, at least about the adoption of Angular 2, is you might have recently noticed that we deployed our website in Chinese. And you might wonder why. That was our first, internationalization, if you will, and that included all of the support documents. And the reason that we did that is that we found a huge number of Chinese startups and really large enterprises. In fact, the top 3 largest enterprises in China are all on Angular, and some of those are on Angular 2 already. So if you think about the biggest company in China right now, which is probably all on top of your minds, they're embracing Angular 2. And so we hired a developer advocate out there. We've hired a GDE out there. We're going to do a big Chinese roadshow in December because we're seeing a lot of traction out there with their startups.
Nice. Sweet. I got a question. So are there any really awesome, amazing features that you guys wish you would have got in but didn't really make the cut? I'm sure there's something.
They already asked you that question.
Oh, they did? Oh, they already asked? Oh, okay. Sorry. Hey, sorry. This is a really popular question.
I should remember my answer to make sure I don't mistake myself.
What did I say?
Maybe we'll get a different answer out of him this time.
Yeah, if you ask the same question, you might get a different answer, right? Yeah.
If there were more time, obviously, the game, what we're trying to do is to make sure that the core was stable, right? That we could always add another feature to animations or to internationalization or add web workers, etc. But we wanted to make sure that the core wouldn't have to change. And so the biggest focus really was about stabilizing the core API and make sure that we could do everything. And there, the driving factor really was the ahead of time compilation. Once we got that in place, we feel very confident that we can now grow the feature set over time. So what you will see is that amazing stuff will be coming to Angular 2, both in terms of core capabilities like animations and interactions, and just really being able to build apps on par with native, and also being able to target native things, not just necessarily just DOM views like Ionic versus native script and so on. So I think the sky really is the limit of what we can do. The key to the whole thing really was making sure that the core was capable of handling all this stuff.
And I think even inside of the core, like aside from features, there's a huge amount of further room for optimization, I think, in terms of how we generate code, right? We'll start watching, we'll start looking at metrics, as people start to use the framework more and more, we can start tweaking, right? We can start tweaking and improving performance here and there. And I think that's the really cool thing about AOT in general, right? Is that what we wanted to make sure is that when you write Angular applications today, right, like you're going to write an Angular app, Angular is going to sort of ingest it and translate it or whatever, and then it's going to spit out new code. I think the cool thing about that is that you can keep your code the same, and as we improve the underlying framework, right, your ngFors will get faster, your ngIfs will get faster without rewriting code. And I think that's the most interesting thing about this sort of layer we've got in here, right?
So stop me if I'm getting too deep. But so, for example, we have an actual compiler pipeline in the system, and currently it's really just generating the most naive code out there just so we can kind of build it. But it turns out that even with the naive code, like we have already gotten the size down and the speed is way up. But now imagine what we could do if we, into the pipeline, add optimizations, right? This is your GCC-O, whatever 5 or whatever the flag is. in a command line, right? And so over time, what you will see is a lot more of these things will happen. Now, in order for these things to happen, a couple of things have to be true. One is that as much of the system is to be declarative as possible, so that we have the freedom internally to rearrange the way things work, right? And so a lot of push of Angular 2 was around that, about how do we make as much of it as possible declarative, and the API surface as far away from the internals of what's happening. The other thing, for example, we do is that when the AOT is happening, we make sure that the AOT is the last step in a chain, right? So it's not that the component authors pre-compile their code. Rather, we ship the component author's source code, and then we compile it as a very, very end step. And as a result, we can do optimizations in the future that wouldn't be possible otherwise. And so as you are revving your version of Angular that you're using, you're not only making your application faster, but also the third-party components that you'll be happy to be using as well. And so there's a lot of ways we could take this. And I know I'm kind of getting geeked out over here on the internals of how the stuff works, but I really feel very, very happy as to the internal state of what we have in there. And while it's not something that we can necessarily show today, it is something that will give us dividends over many, many years to come.
I think as the underlying platform improves, right, the browser platform, as APIs come out, as we see new things we can take advantage of, right, then we have the ability there to plug into those things. So.
Awesome. So, as we know, with great power comes great responsibility, right? And this new platform release has a lot of power with it. Do you guys have any plans for recommendations or patterns or practices for things like when do we ng module things? Are we going to do Redux patterns, stuff like that? Or are you going to kind of leave that up to the community for a while and have them drive it and decision making on that?
So we have a style guide, and so I think that we have the style guide. I think we've learned as much as we can, I think, initially from that, right? But I think the other thing is that this is all new to a lot of people, right? And not just JS modules and ES6 and all of this stuff being new, right? But how you use Angular 2, how you use modules. Now that you have the separation between the platform and your app, right? Now that you have the ability to do web workers, now that you have all these different capabilities, it's hard, I think, for us to say this is the right way, right? Like, we want to enable people to choose, right? And I think that, like in Angular 1, it took a little bit of time to come up with these best practices, right? People will experiment, people will learn, and these things will coalesce, right? So we have some ideas, I think, of where people should start. But we're definitely excited to see where the community start to feed this stuff back to us, right? Where does it make sense to split ng modules out? Where does it make sense to do lazy loading? All of these things, right, we'll see from people starting to build more and more applications with them. And that part of my job as a developer advocate is when we get that feedback, to feed it back into the core team so that we can bake these patterns in, right?
Hello?
I'm just curious when you're going to send Rob to help me upgrade my app. So what's the upgrade path?
That job that I changed every 6 months, that's
what's the upgrade path for everyone? Like, I've got a big Angular 1 app. How am I gonna?
Right. So we have the energy upgrade module, and what that allows you to do today is to mix Angular 1 and Angular 2 together on a single web page. Currently, both of them are in what we call JIT mode, where all the compilation happens on the client. We are debating and looking into the possibility of enabling at least Angular 2 to be in AOT mode, and then the Angular 1 obviously will have to stay in JIT mode. And so the upgrade story is really the ability to upgrade your application one component at a time and bring it into the Angular 2 world.
And I think, to be perfectly frank, we made this fairly significant ng modules change 8 weeks ago now or so. And I think that modules as a thing bring Angular 2 probably a lot closer to Angular 1 in the way you think about them, right? We had Angular modules and Angular 2 modules. And I think that we didn't have that idea when the first iterations of Upgrade were built, right? Like modules, ng modules for Angular 2 were not a thing when we built them.
So Angular 1 has modules. I think the modules really are kind of a secondary problem, right? The real problem we want to solve is to make sure that you can embed Angular 1 components out of Angular 2 and vice versa, and also that the injectors are patched so that one can inject from the other. And provided that you can do that, you should be able to build an app that's mixed mode. For sure. And so people are out there already who are succeeding. So over time, I think we're going to get better at it.
Yep.
But I think that what we even have today is totally doable.
Yeah, and I think so. I think after we go to 2.0.0, then part of my list of things to do after that is to go back and look at upgrade, right, and to look at that future path, right, to see how we start to align these two even closer. It's been really difficult, I think, to sort of say this is the way we'll do it until we have the final APIs, right? Like it's very hard with a moving target to say this is what we'll do. And I think now that we have these final targets, I think we can go back and look at upgrade and make it even better.
The router in Angular 2 is really awesome. As someone that's using,
to hear that.
as someone that's using, Angular 1, how do I use the new router with that upgrade plan?
So we've talked about this a little bit, I think.
Yeah, so you can use the new router. Obviously, the new router can only route to Angular 2 components, but there's no reason why you cannot embed Angular 1 components out of that Angular 2 component that you routed into. So that is the strategy today. Going forward, we can explore to see if we can directly load Angular 1 component. I don't think it should be that difficult to do. It's one of those data releases that we'll probably do in the future.
And I think the other thing to mention, just so we're clear, right, is that I think there's a fair portion of Angular 1 apps out in the world that are using UI router, right? Like I think that's, from everybody that I've spoken to over the years, I think it's probably the winner in terms of Angular 1 routers. And Chris has been really good, and I've been talking to Chris, and he's been talking to all kinds of people about making sure that UI router works in 2. He's got UI router working with ng modules. It's a really slick integration. So I'm pretty excited to see, again, now that we have a final API, where Chris goes with UI router, right? And we'll definitely be supporting him on that as we go.
I'm actually using UI router with Angular 1 and Angular 2. It works really well, so I would highly recommend it.
Sorry, our lights are going out. Okay.
Jeff wanted to ask, what is your view on convention over configuration for Angular 2?
So sure. In general, I'm a fan of convention over configuration. The thing is that certain frameworks have a little bit more of an advantage of it than others. So if you wanted to, a long time ago, we made a decision that when you write an application, whether you run it in a JIT mode or in ahead of time compiled mode, the application should be written the same exact way and it should behave the same exact way. Right, and that puts a limit to what kind of a convention over configuration you can do, because it prevents the browser cannot like dynamically discover like what is around me. Let me poke on some random URL, see if I get 404s. Right, that doesn't fly. And so to a large degree, that is the limit to what we can do, because we made that choice.
And I think on a personal note, this is probably kind of controversial to say on a podcast for web developers, right? That I think that we've had, over the years, we've had a huge amount of input in terms of developer ergonomics, right? I think that Angular 1 was really good at that. I think React is pretty good at that. But I think that one of the big things for us has been like your users. And when I say users, I mean the people who are consuming your applications, I think are the most important clients, right? So for us, I think our primary thing from the very, very beginning was making it fast, making it efficient, making all these things possible, right? And then I think conventions are something we can add later, right? But it's very difficult to go change the underlying architecture to make it fast after the fact.
Right, you can always add sugar to this stuff to make it more delicious, right? But if you don't have the right bones at the center of it, like it doesn't work.
And I think there's some really, really awesome conventions I think we can get into as we go along. And I think that that's where we'll start to see extensibility in Angular, right? So being able to override the compiler, being able to tinker with these things, right? It's not easy right now. We don't have API services for these things. And again, we want to see how people are using the framework, see what patterns emerge, and then we'll go back and look at putting in extensible APIs into compiler pipelines and things like that, right?
And I think there's examples of this, like prior art of this. So for example, we started off when we said we wanted to have a unidirectional data flow, right, from the top to the bottom. And that meant that two-way data binding was kind of tricky. And there was a huge uproar, and in the end of it, we just added the banana in a box syntax, right? I mean, if you look at the amount of code it took to add banana in a box, it was a trivial amount of stuff, right? But the thing is, if we started with this idea of like, no, everything is bidirectional, we would have prevented ourselves from ever having this efficient way of pushing data down to the client, right? And so my philosophy has always been, you start with the core principles of, how do you make it efficient first, make it work properly, and then later on you go back and say, okay, now how do I make it more palatable by adding things like banana in the box, or I'm sure there was other examples of this thing that happened in the past.
Well, component, right?
Components and ng models and so on, right? Like all of these things can be added later on. But if you don't get the basic core principles correct, you will struggle all throughout. So our philosophy has always been like, start with the core, even if it's complicated. You know, there's a joke over here that's computer science-y. We can always add the stuff up to it later to make it palatable. But if you just can't do it from the other way around.
Make it sweeter. It's already palatable.
Sure, make it sweeter, yeah.
I think that's one positive thing that as we look back in retrospect on this journey that everybody's taken, right? And we see that, like, from the very beginning, your focus was on this performance and this, you know, like you said, the end user of this stuff that's going to use this app. And along the journey, we dealt with stuff from a developer standpoint that we had to struggle with, the changes and stuff like that. But ultimately, that other mission was there from the very beginning. And now as we get in this release, we get these apps out there in the wild, I think we're going to see the fruits of that labor, and it's going to be really nice. And like you said, as we go along the development experience, all these things for us as developers will get better, right?
Yes.
But ultimately, the buyer of our products are going to benefit because you made that decision early on.
Yes.
And there's tens of thousands of times more developers developing with Angular than there are developing Angular, right? So I think that the conventions, the sugar stuff, the good ideas will come from the community as well, right? People will start to feed back in and say, hey, I do this 10 times a day. Why can't I do this one time a day, right?
Yeah, talking about that, Patrick has been written a lot of modules and plugins for Webpack, making all of that work much better. He's been a huge help for the community. So yeah, that's definitely something that we can do on our own if we want.
So like Patrick's, what's it called, conventions loader or something along those lines, right? I think that's the sort of thing I think that I would like to bake into one day, right? But again, because we have these restrictions, it's got to run in JIT and it's got to run in AOT mode, right? Like we have these restrictions that we have to have in place initially. And then it's totally legit for the Patricks of the world to go and put the conventions on top, right? And I think that if we decide that everybody likes that convention and it works for everybody and it doesn't break our rules, then we can sort of bring that back into the core of the framework.
You know, and it could be that we will later discover that everybody's doing AOT and nobody's doing JIT, and so we can drop that, right? But I'm not ready to make the decision at this point. So this is why we have this rule that like it has to work the same way in both.
Yeah, I get it. So are you guys excited to come to Angular Connect and meet the fam and say, hey, it's done, you can use it now?
You know what I'm excited
about? The question.
I'm going to go to Angular Connect and nobody's going to ask me when is Angular 3 going to come out. And I don't have to say...
But they could ask you when Angular 3 is going to come out.
That's true. And I can start saying soon again, right? So,
sweet.
Yeah,
So
we're pretty excited to go out and be able to say to people, it's done, go build your cool stuff, and really get some feedback on people who've been using it up until this point and see where to go next, right?
And just to be clear, you know, like with Semver, we'll probably hit Angular 3 and 30 and 50 pretty soon. But like Angular as in the total rewrite of Angular the 3rd is not going to happen. I am not doing it.
We're not doing that.
I'm not doing it. I'm done.
All right, you heard it here. You heard it here. All right.
And for a couple of reasons. Like first, I really feel very, very excited about like the core, what we have going in the core, like the capabilities we have, and specifically how we're lined up for future possibilities. And so I don't really see a need to do these. I mean, it is kind of the 3rd iteration of Angular, right? There was AngularJS, there was the Angular Dart, which happened, I'm not sure that many people noticed that. And then this is really Angular 2, is really almost the 3rd iteration of it. So I feel like we've gone through this enough times that I'm pretty confident that we got the core of this stuff correct.
We've become exceedingly efficient at it, as they would say.
Yes, we've become exceedingly efficient at the core of it.
All right, well, I think we're getting time to close up here. So anybody got any last questions? Hit these guys up for?
Yeah, I got one. So if I'm a startup with engineers between 5 and 15, what are your 3 reasons of why I should use Angular 2 for our project?
The first one is TypeScript, man. I love TypeScript. It's all the power of JavaScript, right? Like we're not asking you to unlearn anything that you know about JavaScript. We're just giving you better tools so that people can communicate better, right? Literally, if you have a huge number of engineers, even if you have more than one, right, you already have the problem that you have to communicate between each other. And what TypeScript allows you to do is give names to things, you know? So instead of saying this and that and the other thing, right, you actually have proper names that you all agree on and the compiler agrees on, and you all go with it, and it's a formal set of rules by which you can validate against. I think that is absolutely huge. And obviously, the Angular 2 itself is very declarative. It's very toolable. So while maybe all of these features are not available today, but like very soon, I see this world in which the ecosystem, the IDE authors, and the tools that come from it, right, all are going to be possible because Angular 2 is so declarative and so localized in reasoning, right? That any tool it doesn't have to look at it globally as what's going on, but the tool can just look at an individual file and say, I understand this file and I can be useful and provide useful things. And so I think a lot of things will come in that particular flavor. So tooling, it's really just tooling.
And then perf, I think is the other one, right?
Performance,
like, it's fast today, it's insanely fast today, and it's only going to get faster, and it's only going to get faster as the web gets faster. And I think that to me is the most exciting thing under the hood, right? Is that we have this distinction, this abstraction layer that you can write an app, you don't have to worry about changing the underlying guts of it, right? And as the platform evolves, we'll just keep making it faster and faster and faster.
Mm-hmm.
Like
so Shadow
DOM is a good example of that, right? Like Shadow DOM, you can turn it on today, but we can fake it for you if we don't have it, right? And then the day that Shadow DOM's everywhere, you can turn it off and it just works, right? And I think we'll see more and more and more of that in the framework.
I got a question. In March, I tweeted about Angular 2 having a dependency of React.js, and Rob tweeted back at me and said, Angular 2 is just a wrapper for React. When did you guys move off of that? No, I'm just kidding.
Why did we had a dependency? So these are the weird tweets that I get because people they look through our packages and they go, why do you have React as a dependency?
Probably because
benchmarking, I think.
It was benchmarking, yeah. I'm just teasing you.
But I think the other reason might be is because of the React Native.
That's true. Yeah. That's true.
So we do know React Native, the library which exposes all of the iOS, Android native stuff to JavaScript, and so we can render to React Native. It's one of the targets we have.
And we should say, just as about React, right, that I think that what React's done over the past years has been very, very interesting to watch. I think they've done really good work, and I think they've put forward some really good patterns, and I think that we'll continue to evolve on those. I feel like our teams are both solving the same sort of very, very hard problems on the web, right? And they come in and meet with us, and we go and meet with them. And I think that we've learned a lot over the past, 3 years of building Angular, right? 3-ish years now. I think that they've been a part of that. I think what React team is doing is amazing, and I think that we'll leapfrog them, and this will continue for the next 20 years of the web, probably, right?
Mm-hmm.
We'll keep doing this. So.
That's awesome. Thanks, guys.
Olivia, you got anything else you want to ask? Squeeze in there?
I was just wondering where Brad was, because I still have his leg.
I would tell you to bring it to Angular Connect to give it back, but unfortunately, Brad will not be with us at Angular Connect this year.
Probably won't let you take it on the plane anyway. So.
It's kind of creepy, but
Cool. All right, well, let's do some picks really quick. I'm sure this will be pretty quick. I'll start. My pick is the API stability for the win. We're pretty excited that this is finally here, and we can start building and training and creating with this stuff. So pretty exciting day.
Until Angular 3.
When is ASX coming?
I shouldn't even talk about this. But
you should look at Patrick's troll. He mocked something out in GX.
Well, I did too, and I think it's not something I would use, but I don't think that it's something that couldn't be done, right? And I don't think our team's going to build it, but I think that it could be done, right? And I said that in the issue that somebody opened this up 2 years ago, and I said, well, look, we're not going to do it, but if you want to do it, then I'll tweet about it. You want to make it? I'll tweet about it. It's fine, but.
Patrick did ngX, I think is what he called it. He started it. I don't know how far along it's went though.
Yeah, I got a prototype working, and it's interesting. It doesn't work for my brain, but it's feasible. Each goes wheels turning.
I know. I was already thinking about it. I think off the top of my head, I think I don't know how we were played with AOT. That's the thing that I'm thinking about right now. Again, it comes down to being able to statically analyze everything so that you can reason about the whole thing. And anyways, off the topic.
Cool.
ngX is not.
Olivia, you got a pick?
Yeah, my picks are Angular 2 and Angular Connect. So I'm excited. I've been using Angular 2 for the past 5 months, I think, at work. We are releasing our application really soon, so we are really glad that it's finally released for good.
Awesome. Anybody else have any picks, or are they all just Angular 2?
I got one.
All right. Go ahead, Scott.
I got 2 picks. First pick is Interstellar. That movie still makes me cry. I listen to the soundtrack every day. It's just a great movie. If you've never seen it, just watch the movie.
So, you know what? Here's the thing I don't get about Interstellar, man. So they're getting off the Earth, and they use like 3 boosters to get off, right? Like there's a 3-stage rocket where they're like, okay, we're losing a booster, and this is like totally physics. That's how you get off the Earth. But it turns out Earth is like 60% of like what's possible to get off with chemical propulsion. Anyways, they go to this other planet where the gravity is massive, like this fucking black hole, right? And then they just they just get off without any boosters. I'm like, wait a minute, it doesn't happen.
So when people ask me what is it like to work on the Angular team, it's like that every day. This is what we do.
That's a pothole.
Interstellar, I was really, really, really sick with 104.5 fever, and they gave me these drugs, and I watched Interstellar, and apparently all I remember about the movie is at the end, I apparently said, if they pulled her through something, I'm going to write a letter to the people who made this thing. But I never wrote the letter, and we're getting kicked out of our room.
Oh, no.
That's all?
Thanks a lot. Appreciate it.
Thank you, guys.
Bye.
See you.
They